The morning sun cast long shadows across the orbital platform above New York City when Commander Jake Morrison noticed the first distortion in space. He stood at the observation deck of Station Alpha, his coffee growing cold as he watched something impossible unfold before his eyes. The stars were bending, twisting into shapes that made his stomach turn. "Control, this is Morrison. Are you seeing this?" He spoke into his communicator, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up his spine. "Copy that, Commander. We're tracking multiple anomalies across all sectors. Whatever it is, it's big." Jake had been stationed on the platform for 3 years, watching over Earth's defense grid. Nothing had prepared him for what emerged from the twisted space above him. The ship that materialized was massive, easily 10 times larger than anything humans had ever built. Its hull was dark metal that seemed to absorb light, covered in structures that looked more like weapons than anything peaceful down on Earth. Dr. Lisa Carter was having her morning meeting in Geneva when the alerts started screaming across every screen in the Global Defense Center. She pushed her glasses up her nose and stared at the readings flooding in from satellites and ground stations worldwide. The numbers didn't make sense. Energy signatures off the charts. Mass readings that suggested ships the size of small cities. How many? She asked her assistant, Tony Blake, who was frantically typing at his workstation. 17 confirmed contacts. Major cities across 6 continents. They're just sitting there, waiting. Lisa felt her blood run cold. Earth had been preparing for first contact for decades, but not like this. Not with ships that appeared without. Warning above every major population center on the planet. Captain Ryan Brooks was aboard the Earth defense vessel Liberty when the call came in. His ship was humanity's pride, equipped with the latest fusion drives and particle weapons. He'd trained for this moment his entire career, but as he watched the alien vessels through his viewscreen, he realized how inadequate their preparations had been. "All stations, this is Captain Brooks. We're moving to intercept the bogey over New York. Follow standard first contact protocols until we know their intentions." His crew moved with practiced efficiency, but Ryan could see the fear in their eyes. The alien ship wasn't responding to any communication attempts. It just hung there in space like a dark promise of things to come. The first broadcast came exactly 1 hour after the ships appeared. Every screen on Earth, every communication device, every display suddenly showed the same terrifying image. It was a city, but not one from Earth. The buildings were strange, made of materials that gleamed like crystal. But what made Lisa gasp was what was happening to the people in the streets. They were running, screaming, dying. Creatures in dark armor moved through the crowds with weapons that didn't kill quickly. The victims writhed on the ground, their faces twisted in agony that seemed to go on forever. Above it all, text appeared in perfect English. The city of Veltar. Population, 12 million. Resistance, futile. The image changed to show another world, another city, another population being systematically destroyed. Then another, and another, 17 worlds. Billions of beings, all conquered, all broken, all suffering. "This is what happens to those who resist." The voice that accompanied the images was cold, emotionless. "This is what happens to those who fight back. You have one rotation of your planet to surrender completely. Choose wisely." Jake felt his hands shaking as he watched the broadcasts. He'd seen combat before, had fought in the Mars Rebellion, but nothing like this. The aliens weren't just conquering worlds. They were breaking them, turning entire populations into examples of what happened to those who dared oppose them. "Sir, we're getting reports from all defense platforms," his communications officer, Linda Shaw, said with a trembling voice. "The alien ships are scanning our weapons systems. They're not even trying to hide it." President Helen Taylor stood in the emergency session of the Global Council, watching the same horrific images that billions of people were seeing worldwide. The leaders of every nation sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. This wasn't first contact. This was an ultimatum. "What are our options?" she asked General Peter Stone, head of Earth's combined military forces. "Limited, Madam President. Our best estimates suggest each of those ships carries enough firepower to level a continent. We have 47 vessels that might be able to engage them, but the odds ... What odds, General? 0% chance of victory. Maybe 10% chance of inflicting any meaningful damage before we're wiped out. Lisa was running calculations in her head as she watched the broadcasts. The aliens were showing them these images for a reason. They wanted humanity to understand exactly what they were capable of. Fear was their weapon, and they were using it with surgical precision. They're not just conquering, she said to her team. They're harvesting. Look at the patterns in the broadcasts. They're not killing everyone. They're selecting, categorizing, breaking people down systematically. Tony nodded grimly. Like they're farming them. The thought made Lisa's skin crawl. These weren't just invaders. They were something worse, something that viewed entire civilizations as resources to be managed and exploited. Ryan was getting his first taste of alien technology when the Liberty tried to approach the New York ship. His weapons locked onto the target, but the beams just dispersed harmlessly against some kind of energy field. The alien vessel didn't even acknowledge their presence. "Captain, we're being scanned," his tactical officer, Sam Martinez, reported. "They're taking detailed readings of our ship, our weapons, everything. Can we block it?" "No, sir." "It's like they're looking right through our hull. I've never seen anything like it." The scan lasted exactly 30 seconds. Then, without warning, the alien ship opened fire. Not at the Liberty, but at the orbital defense platform surrounding Earth. Jake watched in horror as Station Beta exploded in a ball of superheated plasma. The weapon that destroyed it was invisible, striking faster than light itself. "All units, withdraw immediately," Ryan ordered, but it was too late. The aliens were methodically destroying every piece of military hardware in orbit. Not to kill the crews, but to make a point. They could destroy everything humans had built whenever they chose. Jake barely managed to evacuate Station Alpha before it too was vaporized. As his escape pod fell toward Earth, he watched the alien ships demonstrate their power. They could have destroyed every orbital installation instantly, but they chose to do it slowly, deliberately, making sure every human on the planet understood how helpless they were. The second broadcast came 12 hours later. This time it showed the leader of the alien fleet. It was tall, covered in dark armor that seemed to move like liquid metal. When it spoke, its voice was translated perfectly into every human language. "I am Painbringer Zachtho of the Velthic Empire. We have conquered 17 star systems. We have broken 43 different species. You will be the 44th. You have 12 hours to surrender completely. Your military will stand down, your leaders will submit, your people will accept their new purpose. Resistance will result in the complete sterilization of your planet. Choose wisely." The image changed to show Earth from space, with targeting reticles appearing over every major city. The message was clear: surrender or die. President Taylor made the call that would haunt her for the rest of her life. With tears streaming down her face, she addressed the world. "Citizens of Earth, after consultation with the Global Council and military leadership, we have no choice but to accept the alien ultimatum. All military forces are ordered to stand down. All resistance is to cease immediately. May God help us all." The Velthic had won without firing a single shot at human forces. They had conquered Earth exactly as they had conquered 43 other worlds, through fear, overwhelming force, and the systematic destruction of hope. What they didn't know was that humans were different from the other species they had broken. What they didn't know was that surrender was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something far worse than anything they had ever encountered in their centuries of conquest. 6 months had passed since the surrender, and Earth looked like a different world. The Velthic had wasted no time in establishing their control over every aspect of human life. Their dark ships hung over major cities like storm clouds that never moved. Constant reminders of who was in charge. Jake Morrison stood in line with 200 other prisoners at the Chicago containment facility. The former commander now wore the same gray uniform as everyone else, a number burned into the fabric where his name used to be. The aliens had been very clear about their rules. Humans were no longer individuals. They were resources to be managed. The camp was surrounded by energy barriers that would kill anyone who touched them. Guard towers manned by Velthic soldiers watched over the prisoners day and night. But Jake had learned something important in his 6 months here. The aliens were predictable. They followed patterns, schedules, routines. They had conquered so many worlds that they had turned oppression into a science. "Morrison, you're wanted in processing," called out Guard Unit 47. The Velthic didn't use names among themselves either. They were just as much part of a machine. As they expected humans to be, Jake walked through the compound, noting the positions of the guards, the timing of their patrols, the blind spots in their surveillance. Old habits died hard, and his military training was still sharp even after months of forced labor. The processing center was where humans were sorted into categories. The Velthic had divided humanity into groups based on their usefulness. Scientists and engineers went to research facilities. Strong workers went to mining operations. The old and sick went to places Jake tried not to think about. Dr. Lisa Carter was having her own nightmare 2,000 miles away in what used to be the Geneva Research Center. The facility had been converted into a Velthic science laboratory, where human researchers were forced to work on projects for their new masters. The aliens were smart enough to know that their slaves would be more productive if they thought their work might help humanity somehow. "Dr. Carter, report to Station 7, the facility supervisor, a tall Velthic called Overseer Nexhall, pointed to a workstation with its clawed hand. "You will continue your analysis of human neural patterns." Lisa had been studying brain scans for months, supposedly to help the aliens understand human psychology better. But she had started to notice something disturbing about the data. The Velthic weren't just studying human minds. They were studying human fear. The neural patterns they wanted mapped were all related to terror, pain, and despair. She sat at her station and pulled up the latest batch of scans. These were from prisoners in the work camps, humans who had been exposed to various stress situations. The detail was horrifying. The aliens had been systematically testing different ways to cause psychological trauma, measuring the exact responses in the human brain. "Interesting species," Overseer Nexhall said, standing behind her. "Your fear responses are more complex than most. Very flavorful." Lisa's blood ran cold. She had suspected something like this for weeks, but hearing it confirmed was different. "What do you mean by flavorful?" "We do not just conquer worlds for territory, Dr. Carter. We conquer them for sustenance. Your species produces particularly rich terror compounds. Very nutritious." The truth hit Lisa like a physical blow. The Velthic didn't just feed on regular food. They fed on fear itself, on the chemical responses that human brains produced when experiencing terror. That's why they kept humans alive. That's why they had perfected the art of psychological torture. They were literally farming human suffering. Captain Ryan Brooks had managed to avoid capture after the surrender, but survival in the wilderness was getting harder every day. His small group of refugees had been living in the forests of northern Canada, staying off the main roads and avoiding the alien patrols that swept through the area regularly. "Brooks, we've got movement on the eastern ridge," whispered his second-in-command, Lieutenant Carol Reed. She was watching through binoculars as a Velthic patrol craft moved slowly through the valley below them. "How many?" Ryan asked, checking his weapon. They had managed to salvage some military equipment during the retreat, but ammunition was running low. 3 guards, standard patrol pattern. "They're checking the old mining camps," Ryan nodded. They had been watching these patrols for weeks, learning their schedules and routes. The aliens were thorough but predictable. They treated Earth like they had treated 43 other worlds, following the same procedures that had worked before. What worried Ryan was how easily the Velthic had adapted to Earth's environment. Their technology seemed to work perfectly in any conditions. Their armor protected them from Earth's climate. Their weapons functioned flawlessly, and their scanners could detect human life signs from miles away. "Sir, we're getting low on food," said Private Danny Foster, the youngest member of their group. He was barely 21, had been fresh out of basic training when the invasion started. The hunting is getting worse. I think they're using something to drive the wildlife away. Ryan had noticed the same thing. The forests were getting quieter every day. The Velthic were systematically destroying the ecosystem, not through pollution or violence, but through careful manipulation. They were turning Earth into a controlled environment where humans could only survive in designated areas. Back in the Chicago camp, Jake was beginning to understand the full scope of the Velthic operation. During his work shifts in the facility's power plant, he had overheard conversations between the guards. The aliens were building something beneath the camp, something that required massive amounts of energy and precise temperature control. "What do you think they're building down there?" asked Marcus Webb, a former engineer who worked alongside Jake in the power station. "Nothing good," Jake replied, watching a group of Velthic technicians carry strange equipment toward the elevator that led to the lower levels. "But we need to find out." The opportunity came during a maintenance shift when Jake was assigned to check the power systems on the lower floors. The elevator descended much deeper than he had expected, finally opening into a vast underground chamber that made his stomach turn. The room was filled with rows of pods, each one containing a human being. The people inside were unconscious, connected to machines that Jake didn't recognize. Their faces were twisted in expressions of terror, even in their sleep. Above each pod, monitors showed brain activity patterns that pulsed with the rhythm of nightmares. "Fascinating, isn't it?" said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see a Velthic technician, its armor gleaming under the chamber's harsh lights. "We call it the Fear Garden. Your species is so wonderfully productive when properly stimulated." Jake stared at the pods, realizing what he was seeing. The Velthic weren't just content to harvest fear from their conscious prisoners. They were creating artificial nightmares, keeping humans in a state of constant terror while they slept. The pods were feeding systems, designed to extract the maximum amount of fear chemicals from each person. "How many?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. "This facility processes 1,200 units daily. We have similar installations in every major population center. Your species is proving quite valuable." The technician moved away, leaving Jake alone with the horrible truth. Humanity wasn't just enslaved. They were being systematically harvested. Their emotions turned into food for creatures that saw them as nothing more than cattle. That night, Jake lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. Around him, other prisoners tossed and turned, many crying out in their sleep. He had thought the Velthic were just conquerors, but they were something worse. They were farmers, and humans were their crop, but Jake had learned something important during his months in captivity. The aliens had made one crucial mistake in their assessment of humanity. They had studied human fear, human despair, human suffering. They had learned to harvest these emotions with scientific precision. What they hadn't studied was human anger. They hadn't learned to recognize the signs of rage building in the human mind. They didn't understand that there was a point where fear stopped being useful, where terror transformed into something far more dangerous. Jake felt that transformation beginning inside himself as he lay in the dark. The fear was still there, but it was changing, hardening into something cold and sharp. The Velthic had taught him exactly what they were capable of. Now he was going to teach them what humans were capable of when they had nothing left to lose. The next morning, Jake began his real work. Not the labor the aliens assigned him, but the careful, patient process of turning desperate humans into something their captors had never encountered before. He started with quiet conversations, whispered words of encouragement, small acts of defiance that reminded people they were still human. The Velthic had perfected the art of breaking civilizations, but they had never tried to break a species that could learn to break back. They were about to discover that human fear, when pushed too far, had a tendency to transform into something that even nightmares would fear. The hunt had begun 3 weeks ago, and Jake Morrison was leading it with the patience of a predator who had learned from the best teachers possible. His group of escaped prisoners had grown to nearly 400, but they weren't running anymore. They were stalking through the ruins of Chicago, moving like shadows through territory their former captors thought they controlled. "Target acquired," whispered Amy Stone, a former police sniper who had become Jake's best tracker. She was watching a Velthic patrol through her scope, 3 alien guards moving through what used to be Grant Park. "Standard formation, same route they used yesterday." Jake studied the patrol through his binoculars. The aliens were confident, moving without the caution that smart predators should show. They had been the hunters for so long that they had forgotten how to be prey. That was going to be their first mistake. "Remember the rules?" Jake said quietly to his team. "We don't just kill them. We teach them what it feels like to be food." The trap was simple but effective. The humans had learned to use the Veilthax own technology against them, captured weapons that fired energy bolts hot enough to melt steel. But more importantly, they had learned to think like their enemies. They knew the aliens fed on fear, so they had become experts at creating it. The first Velthic guard noticed something was wrong when his companion simply vanished. One moment the alien was there, the next moment there was just empty air and a small scorch mark on the ground. The remaining guards raised their weapons, scanning for threats they couldn't see. "Unit 23, report status," the lead guard called into his communicator. There was no response. The aliens were learning what humans had felt for over a year. The fear of being hunted by something they couldn't understand. Jake's team moved with practiced silence surrounding the remaining guards. But they didn't attack immediately. They wanted the aliens to feel the terror building, to understand that they were trapped. The Velthic had taught humans to be afraid. Now humans were returning the lesson. The second guard died slowly, his screams echoing through the empty park. Jake's people had learned exactly how the alien nervous system worked, exactly how to cause maximum pain while keeping the victim alive. The lead guard tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The humans had turned the entire area into a killing ground. 2,000 miles away, Dr. Lisa Carter was putting the finishing touches on her masterpiece. The laboratory had become her workshop, and she was creating something that would have horrified her a year ago. The weapon she was building wasn't designed to kill quickly. It was designed to be poetic justice. "The neural toxin is ready," she told her assistant, Kevin Ross, who had been helping her with the project. "When a Velthic tries to feed on human fear, this will overload their system. Instead of nourishment, they'll get poison." The toxin was based on her months of studying how the aliens fed. She had learned that their digestive system was perfectly adapted to process human terror, but it had no defenses against modified fear chemicals. The weapon would turn every human into a potential trap, their suffering transformed into something lethal. "How do we deliver it?" Kevin asked, looking at the vials of clear liquid that contained months of work. "We don't," Lisa said with a cold smile. "We become the delivery system. Volunteers will have the toxin injected directly into their brain tissue. When the Velthic try to harvest their fear, they'll get a fatal dose instead of a meal." The plan was horrifying in its simplicity. Humans would sacrifice themselves to poison their captors, turning the aliens' feeding process into a weapon. It was the kind of strategy that only a species pushed beyond breaking point could conceive. Captain Ryan Brooks was coordinating the larger war effort from his hidden base in the Canadian wilderness. His small group of survivors had grown into a network of resistance cells spread across 3 continents. They were no longer hiding from the Velthic. They were hunting them. "Sir, we're getting reports from the Chicago cell," said Lieutenant Carol Reed, monitoring the communications equipment they had salvaged. "Morrison's group has eliminated another patrol. That's 12 in the past week." Ryan nodded, marking the location on his map. The pattern was clear. Humans were learning to fight like the Velthic themselves, using fear as a weapon. But they were doing it better than the aliens ever had because humans understood terror from the inside. "What about the other cells?" Ryan asked. "Denver is reporting successful sabotage of 3 processing facilities. The aliens are having trouble maintaining their harvesting operations. Los Angeles has disrupted the fear gardens in 2 camps. And sir, we're getting reports of Velthic casualties from 17 different cities. Ryan felt something he hadn't experienced in over a year: hope. Not the desperate hope of victims, but the cold satisfaction of predators who had found their prey. The humans were winning, not through superior technology or numbers, but through superior understanding of what it meant to be truly dangerous. The breakthrough came when Jake's team captured a Velthic alive. The alien was a low-level technician, responsible for maintaining the fear-harvesting equipment. Jake had plans for it that would have made the creature's worst nightmares seem pleasant. "Please," the alien said in broken English, its translator, struggling with the concept of begging. "We only follow orders. We do not choose to harm your species." Jake looked at the creature with eyes that had seen too much. "You chose to feed on us. You chose to turn our children into nightmares. You chose to make us into cattle." The interrogation lasted 3 days. By the end, the Velthic had told them everything about the alien command structure, their technology, their weaknesses. But more importantly, it had learned what human creativity could accomplish when applied to the art of causing suffering. "Send a message to their command ship," Jake told Amy Stone. "Tell them we have one of their people. Tell them what we're going to do to it if they don't start withdrawing from human cities." The message was broadcast on all frequencies, accompanied by live video of their captive. The Velthic on the screen was barely recognizable as a member of their species. The humans had learned to break minds as efficiently as the aliens had, but with an artistic touch that spoke of personal investment in the process. The response came within hours. Painbringer Zachville himself appeared on communication screens worldwide, his armored form radiating the authority of a being who had conquered 43 worlds. But for the first time since the invasion began, he looked uncertain. "Humans of Earth," the alien leader said, his voice carrying none of its former confidence. "You have taken something that belongs to us. Return it, and we will consider reducing your harvesting quotas." Jake's reply was broadcast from the ruins of Chicago, his voice carrying to every corner of the planet. "We're not returning anything. We're keeping it. And we're going to keep taking more of your people until you learn what it feels like to be the ones who are afraid." The war had changed. The Velthic were no longer dealing with broken slaves who could be controlled through fear. They were facing something they had never encountered in their centuries of conquest, a species that had learned to be more terrifying than they were. Dr. Carter's toxin was spreading through the human population, volunteers lining up to become living weapons. Captain Brooks' resistance network was coordinating attacks across 6 continents. Jake's hunters were moving through the cities, turning the urban landscape into a maze of death traps for alien patrols. But the most important change was psychological. Humans were no longer afraid of the Velthic. They were looking forward to meeting them. The prey had become predators, and they were discovering that they were very good at it. The aliens began to understand that they had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They had assumed that humans would break like every other species they had conquered. Instead, they had created something that made the darkness between stars seem welcoming by comparison. The hunt was on. And for the first time in their imperial history, the Velthic were learning what it meant to be the ones being hunted. They were about to discover that when humans decided to become monsters, they were exceptionally good at it. The final assault on the Velthic command ship began at dawn, but it wasn't the desperate last stand that Painbringer Zachville had expected. Jake Morrison led 500 humans through the lower decks of the massive vessel, moving with the systematic precision of exterminators clearing out pests. "Deck 7 secured," reported Amy Stone through the communication system they had taken from dead Velthic soldiers. "No survivors." "Moving to Deck 8. Jake nodded, checking the tactical display on his captured alien device. The ship's layout was burned into his memory after weeks of planning. Every corridor, every room, every possible escape route had been mapped and blocked. The aliens weren't going anywhere. The Velthic crew was learning what it felt like to be trapped in their own ship, hunted by creatures that had once been their food. The humans moved through the vessel like a plague, leaving nothing alive behind them, But they weren't killing quickly. They were taking their time, making sure every alien understood what was happening to them. Command bridge is 3 decks. Up, Jake said to his team leaders. Remember, we take Zaxthel alive. He needs to see what happens next. Dr. Lisa Carter was watching the assault from the surface, coordinating the final phase of her biological weapon deployment. Every human on the planet now carried the neural toxin in their bloodstream. The Velthic feeding systems had become death traps, killing any alien that tried to harvest human fear. The orbital platforms are going dark, reported Kevin Ross, monitoring the alien installations above Earth. The automatic feeding systems are poisoning themselves. Every time they try to process human terror, they shut down. Lisa smiled coldly. The aliens had built their entire operation around harvesting human suffering, now that suffering had become toxic to them. Their own infrastructure was killing them from the inside, but the toxin was just the beginning. Lisa had discovered something else during her months of research. The Velthic consciousness transfer technology worked both ways. If humans could upload their minds into alien systems, they could haunt their oppressors even after death. Begin Phase 2, she ordered. Around the world, dying humans were connecting themselves to Velthic neural networks, uploading their memories and their rage into the alien collective consciousness. The conquerors were about to learn what it meant to be haunted by 40 billion. Angry ghosts. Captain Ryan Brooks was leading the ground assault on the alien command centers, but his mission wasn't to destroy them. It was to capture them intact. The humans had learned to use Velthic technology better than the aliens themselves, and they had plans for the fleet above Earth. Sir, we've secured the communication array, Lieutenant Carol Reed reported from the main control room. All Velthic. Ships are now under our control. Ryan looked at the screen showing the alien fleet. Dozens of massive warships hung in orbit, their crews either dead or dying from the biological weapons. The vessels that had once threatened to destroy Earth were now humanity's to command. Send the message to every Velthic colony in the galaxy. Ryan ordered, tell them what happened here. Tell them what humans are capable of when we decide to stop being civilized. The message that went out across space was simple but effective. It showed the ruins of the Velthic fleet, the bodies of their crews, and the humans who now controlled their most advanced technology. But more importantly, it showed what humans had become during the occupation. Jake reached the command bridge to find Painbringer Zaxthel alone, his honor guard dead around him. The alien leader was still in his armor, but something had changed. For the first time since humans had known him, he looked afraid. You cannot do this, Zaxthel said, his translator struggling with concepts his species had never needed to express. We are the Velthic. We have conquered 43 worlds. We are the supreme predators of this galaxy. Jake walked slowly around the alien leader, his captured weapon pointed at the creature's head. You were the supreme predators, past tense. Now you're just another species that made the mistake of teaching humans how to hunt. The truth was written in the alien's body language. The Velthic had built their empire on being the most terrifying thing in the galaxy. They had perfected the art of breaking civilizations through fear and overwhelming force. But they had never encountered a species that could learn to be more terrifying than they were. What do you want? Zaxthel asked, and Jake could hear the desperation in the electronic voice. We want you to understand, Jake said calmly. We want you to know what it feels like to be helpless. We want you to experience the terror you've been feeding on for centuries. Jake's team began the process they had perfected on captured Velthic soldiers. They connected the alien leader to the same fear-harvesting equipment his species had used. On humans, but in reverse. Instead of extracting terror, they were injecting it directly into his nervous system. The screams that came from Painbringer Zaxthel echoed through the ship's corridors, but they weren't screams of physical pain. They were the sounds of a mind experiencing every moment of fear that his species had inflicted on their victims. 40 billion human nightmares downloaded directly into one alien consciousness. Dr. Carter's consciousness. Transfer virus was spreading through the Velthic collective network faster than their technicians could contain it. Dead humans were appearing. In their communication systems, their virtual presence becoming more real than the aliens themselves. The conquerors found themselves sharing their own minds with the ghosts of their victims. "Sir, we're getting surrender requests from Velfec colonies across 17 star systems," Kevin reported, his voice filled with amazement. "They're offering complete withdrawal from all occupied worlds." Lisa shook her head. "Too late for that. Send them our terms." The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Complete extermination of the Velfec species. No survivors, no mercy, no negotiations. Humanity had learned too much about what the aliens had done to other civilizations to allow them to continue existing. Captain Brooks was coordinating the launch of the captured fleet when the final Velfec message arrived. It was from their homeworld, their supreme leader begging for mercy, offering to share their technology, promising to never threaten humanity again. "What's our response?" Carol asked. Ryan looked at the message, remembering the fear gardens. The children turned into nightmare fuel, the systematic breaking of human civilization. "Our response is simple. We're coming." The human fleet departed Earth carrying a cargo more terrifying than any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. They carried the collective rage of a species that had been pushed beyond its breaking point. They carried the knowledge of how to turn suffering into art. They carried the systematic patience of predators who had learned from the best. Teachers possible. Jake stood on the bridge of the former Velfec command ship, watching Earth shrink behind them. Painbringer Zaxthel was still alive in the ship's holding cells, experiencing an eternity of terror with each passing second. He would live for years, existing as a living reminder of what happened to species that tried to farm humanity. Estimated arrival at the Velfec home system? Jake asked his navigation officer. 3 months, sir. But we're detecting evacuation signals from their colonies. They're trying to run. Jake smiled coldly. Let them run. We have all the time in the galaxy. The universe was learning a new truth. Humanity had been broken, harvested, and turned into cattle by creatures that thought themselves the ultimate predators. But instead of staying broken, humans had become something worse than their oppressors ever imagined. The galaxy would remember. What happened when you taught humans to be monsters? It would remember that there are fates worse than death, and that humanity had become exceptionally good at delivering them. The species that had once cried for mercy had become the thing that nightmares had nightmares about, and in the darkness between the stars, 43 other species that had been conquered by the Velfec sent messages of gratitude to Earth. They had been waiting centuries for someone to show their oppressors what real terror looked like. Humanity had answered that call, and the galaxy would never be the same. 50 years had passed since the last Velfec died screaming in the ruins of their home world. The galaxy had settled into an uneasy peace, but it was a peace built on fear rather than understanding. Every species in known space had heard the stories of what humans had done to their former oppressors, and none wanted to test whether those stories were true. Commander Sarah Blake stood on the observation deck of the Earth Defense Station watching a delegation of Kethran ambassadors approach through space. The aliens had requested this meeting 3 months ago, their message filled with the careful politeness that every species now used when speaking to humans. "Ma'am, the Kethran ship is requesting permission to dock," reported Lieutenant David Chun from the communications station. "They're broadcasting full diplomatic credentials and asking for safe passage guarantees." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained cold. Safe passage guarantees. Every alien species that approached Earth now asked for the same thing, as if humans were wild animals that might attack without warning. Perhaps they were right to be afraid. "Grant them permission to dock at Bay 7, she said. "Full security protocols. And Chin, make sure they understand that any aggressive action will be met with immediate termination." The Kethran were a peaceful species, traders and explorers who had never shown hostile intentions toward anyone. But Sarah had learned not to take chances. Humanity had enemies in the galaxy now, species that blamed them for the destruction of the Velfec Empire, and the chaos that followed. Dr. Kevin Ross was in his laboratory on Luna Station, working on humanity's latest project. The Moonbase had become the center of human research and development, a place where scientists pushed the boundaries of what was possible. But their research was no longer focused on peaceful exploration or improving life on Earth. The neural mapping is complete, he told his assistant, Rachel Ward, as they reviewed the data from their latest test. We can now download and store the complete consciousness of any species we encounter. Perfect preservation of memories, personality, everything. Rachel looked at the rows of storage units that lined the laboratory walls. Each one contained the uploaded mind of a different alien, prisoners taken during humanity's expansion across the galaxy. They weren't just studying alien biology anymore. They were collecting alien souls. How many do we have now? She asked. 412 different species, Kevin replied, checking his records. Every intelligent life form we've encountered in the past 30 years. We're building the most complete database of galactic consciousness ever assembled. The project wasn't for scientific research. It was for insurance. Humanity had learned that the best way to control a species was to understand exactly how their minds worked. And if that species became a threat, humans could create perfect copies of their consciousness and use them as weapons against their own people. Captain Mark Thompson was leading the deep space exploration fleet on the outer rim of the galaxy, searching for new worlds and new species to catalog. His ship, the Reaper, was one of 50 vessels that humanity had sent into the void to map every corner of known space. Sir, we're detecting a signal from the Proxima sector, his sensor operator, Nicole Adams reported from her station. It's a distress call from an unknown species. They're requesting immediate assistance? Mark studied the readings on his screen. The signal was coming from a small planet at the edge of the sector, far from any major shipping routes. Whatever was happening there, the aliens were desperate enough to broadcast on all frequencies. Set course for the signal, he ordered. But maintain red alert status. Remember what happened to the Meridian expedition? The Meridian had been lost 6 months ago while investigating a similar distress call. They had found the planet stripped bare, its population missing, and strange energy readings that suggested something had consumed the entire biosphere. The only clue was a single message left in the planet's communication system. The harvesters have returned. Humanity was learning that they weren't the only predators in the galaxy. Something else was moving through the outer systems, something that made the Velthic look gentle by comparison. And whatever it was getting closer to human space. The Kethran ambassador, a tall, blue-skinned creature with 4 arms and gentle eyes, bowed deeply as it entered the meeting room on Earth. Defense Station. Its name was Veltar, and it carried the hopes of an entire species in its diplomatic pouch. Honored humans, Veltar said in carefully practiced English. My people come seeking the protection of your mighty empire. We have heard of your great victories, your power over those who would harm the innocent. Sarah listened to the alien's words, noting the fear that trembled in its voice. The Kethran were afraid, not just of the unknown threats in the galaxy, but of humanity itself. They were asking for protection from the species they had once considered peaceful traders. What kind of protection do you need? Sarah asked, her tone neutral. The harvesters have reached our outer colonies, Veltar explained, its 4 hands shaking as it spoke. They consume everything, leave nothing behind. Our ships, our people, our entire worlds, gone in days. We have nowhere else to turn. Sarah felt a cold smile cross her face. The harvesters. Humanity had been tracking reports of this species for months, following their trail of destruction across the galaxy. They were something new, something that made even humans pause and consider their approach. And what do the Kethran offer in exchange for our protection? She asked. Everything, Veltar said without hesitation. Our technology, our trade routes, our complete loyalty to the human empire. We will be your servants, your subjects, whatever you require. Please, you are our only hope. The conversation was being broadcast live to every human colony in the galaxy. Citizens watched as another species begged for humanity's protection, offering to surrender their independence rather than face the unknown horrors that lurked in space. Dr. Ross was analyzing the latest intelligence reports about the harvesters when the alert came through. His screens lit up with incoming data from the deep space monitoring stations, automated systems that watched the void for signs of hostile activity. "Rachel, you need to see this," he called to his assistant. "We're getting massive energy readings from the Centauri system. Something big just came out of hyperspace." Rachel joined him at the main display, watching as the sensors painted a picture of destruction that made their blood run cold. The harvester fleet had arrived in human space, and it was larger than anything they had ever seen. "How many ships?" she asked. "The computers can't get an accurate count, at least 1,000, maybe more." "And Kevin, look at the size readings. Some of those vessels are larger than Earth's moon." The harvesters weren't just another alien empire. They were something that had evolved beyond the need for planets or resources. They consumed entire star systems, absorbing the energy and matter to fuel their endless expansion across the galaxy. Captain Thompson received the alert while his ship was still approaching the distress signal. The message was simple but terrifying. "All human fleets return to Earth immediately. The harvesters have arrived." He looked at his crew, seeing his own fear reflected in their faces. Humanity had become the most feared species in the galaxy, but they were about to face something that might be beyond even their capabilities. "Sir, what are your orders?" Nicole asked. Mark stared at the void ahead of them, knowing that somewhere, in that darkness, something was coming that would test everything humanity had learned about survival. They had defeated the Velthic by becoming more terrifying than their oppressors. "But what did you do when you faced something that was already worse than your worst nightmares?" "Set course for Earth," he said finally, "and send a message to all human colonies. Tell them to prepare for war. Tell them that this time we're fighting something that might actually be worse than we are." The galaxy was about to learn whether humanity's transformation into the ultimate predator would be enough to survive what was coming. The species that had once been prey was about to discover if they could remain hunters when faced with something that made even them look civilized by comparison.